So hi and welcome back, everyone. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe to my channel. So we are going to quickly start off with getting our starter project. So if you go to your browser and do starter spring IO, you just search that. You should be redirected to start.spring.io. So if you go to start.spring.io, you will be given this initializer here. So what this does is it allows you to quickly spin up your code without having to do a lot of manual configurations. So for this, we will be working with Java as our main language. The project will be Maven. Let's work with Spring Boot 3.5. So we will be doing an upgrade later on, but the difference won't be much. So maybe you can just do here like maybe student. Yeah, everybody has been a student, so I'll just work with student. No, let me just give my package name as Teams Owen, and then my artifact demo. So maybe we'll just say student demo, student demo. Just leave it that way. So for this one, project descriptions, I'm just going to say Spring Boot series. So we will be doing it in around 4 episodes. So the first, the main goal of the first one is to understand how everything works in the basics. Now we're going to compile it to package it under jar. So this comes with already packaged application. Also, we have WAR, which we will later on cover that. So for these properties, so YAML is good, it's amazing. But for us, we will just take the default one, that is .properties. So later on, in maybe another episode, we will be discussing that. So currently, we have Java 17, 21, 25. So for now, I'm going to go with the bare minimum. So that is 17, which allows us to spin up at a good standard. So unfortunately, we won't be going through how to install Java, how to install MySQL, and how to install IntelliJ. I believe there are good tutorials to get you started about that. So on the dependencies, so the first thing we will add is a Spring Web. So this will allow us to include the RESTful APIs, of which this is the main thing or the main agenda why we are here today. So once we have a Spring Web, so we will also be using MySQL. So we need the SQL driver. So you go to MySQL driver, and we will be needing Lombok. So Lombok will allow us to reduce a lot of boilerplate code by using annotations. So we will be able to uh, check and see how Lombok really saves us much boilerplate code. So the last dependency we will be adding is Spring Data JPA. So this will help us a lot with the repository layer where we will need to persist data. So I think up to there we are done. So I'm just going to generate this. So once I've generated it, it's going to download, and we will be good to go back to our IntelliJ. So going to open. So of course, if you're already on a new project, you can just go to File, Open. So I'm just going to go to my downloads, and I have the student demo, and I'm going to open that project. So this one will open, and I will allow it to do the configurations and everything. So of importance here is this folder here. So if you expand on source main, we have very important files here. These plugins, we don't need to really push them. So if you go to here, we need to configure our application here, and our main application sits here. This is the student application. So if you run this application now, you're going to get an error of database. So your database is not configured because Spring will require it for it. So you see, we need a database URL and everything. Good. So for that, we will need to do it in the application properties. So I will just say dot properties Spring Boot, sorry, Spring Boot dot properties file. So I'll just make sure to say include auto update. Then also MySQL, we will be using MySQL dialect. So I will explain this later. I think that is it. So you should be able to generate some good file properties here. So I'm just going to copy this. So I'm going to paste them here, and then we will just do some cleanup. So of course, this is the database configuration, so I'll just leave it there. I don't think we need this for now. You can just, if this has been placed automatically for you, you can remove this. So I'll just explain it from here. Now, starting here, we are doing an auto update directly to our database. So if we have new entries, we will be updating them. And we are just telling here the SQL dialect we are using as our interpreter is MySQL. And then if we want to show the SQL queries on our terminal, okay, not terminal, but our output here, this is what is going to help us. And then we just want to format the SQL statements in a good format. So these are optional again, apart from this one and this. So you can choose to ignore this. Now, to the main important point is, remember we added our SQL driver. So we need to also specify that the driver we're using for the data source is from the MySQL. So for username and password, this is where you configure your database. So I believe also there are good tutorials to guide you through about installing your database in your machine, either Windows, Mac, or anything you're using. Now, the other most important part here, this is just the project name to identify your project. The other most important thing here is configuring your database. Now, so we don't really need all this stuff, but anyway, let's just leave it for now. So we need to say to show you a database. So if you're using Mac, I'm just going to start off my SQL. So I think I had some. So I'm just going to say brew start MySQL. So I'm trying to avoid using the database here, given that some of you might be using the community version. So I'm not really interested more in utilizing this one. So, but if you have the ultimate version, I believe you can make things easier for yourself. You can just go here and do a lot of make a lot of work easier for you. Instead of working with the terminal, you can directly see all your database creations from this point. So back to my terminal. So given that it started, so maybe I will just try to log in to my SQL. So my SQL user root and -p for password. So I'm going to enter my password. And you see now I'm logged into my SQL. So what I'm going to do is I'm just want to see databases that are there. So databases. So it's going to give me a list of databases. If the database I want to create isn't here, the one here, so I'm going to replace this one. So maybe let's say student, the database. So the only thing you're changing within this URL is this. So I will also post this on my GitHub so that you're able to just copy and move if you don't have, if you're not able to access your Copilot or maybe ChatGPT. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go back to my SQL. So you can still perform the same thing in Windows and Mac. So I'm just going to say create database students underscore database. And you can see now my query is okay. So if I now say show databases, you can see that we have a student database. Now I can now copy this and paste it here, just in case I had any typos. All right, so that works. Now let's try and run our application and see if it works. Okay, so we have public key retrieve show. So this is a problem associated with our username and password. So we need to update here. So if you go back to my, I will just share this. It's not really as a database I'm using for anything in production. So if you go here, if you go back to our terminal, so I was using root as my username for my database connection. So I'm just going to update that here to root, and my password just share here. It has nothing to do with any important data. So I'm going to spin the application again, stop and run. So cool. Now you see we have 0 problems. Now we can start by defining our entity. So in Spring Boot, data flows from your controller to your service, to your repository, and of course your model. We don't need to put anything within your model. So we just need to define the standard of your model. So for us, we are going to use Postman as our client to make to query, save, and maybe update. So I'm not going to focus more on putting everything inside packages and stuff. Okay, we can just do it. So you can say we want to have a package called model. We would also want to have another package called, so from the model, we will go to repository, and then from the repository layer, we will go to service. Of course, from service, we would go to service implementation, but this one, given it's barely a starter or maybe our first episode, so we will later on improve on that. So for now, from the service layer, we would want to wind up with the controller layer. So just note that you first define your model, and then we now go back to the repository where we get all the database functions to save, update, delete, and everything. The next thing will be writing the business logic, which will sit on the service layer. And the last place will be now creating the RESTful APIs here, which will happen inside the controller. So basically, this is how simple Spring Boot is. So we are going to go to our model. We're going to create a class. So let's call it a student. So, and just from a very quick overview, so a student will probably have a name. So maybe a course the person is studying, maybe let's say the meaning grade or the score. So for this, remember we talked about Lombok. So we need to tell a Spring Boot that this is an entity or model. So you'll find sometimes it's called our entity or the model. So we need to say, we need to notify Spring Boot that this is an entity. And if you do that and over your mouse here, so all the entities must have a unique identifier, which is usually the primary key. So for our case, we are going to use the ID. So I'm going to say private. Let's have it as a long, maybe ID. And we need to add the annotation from Jakarta. So make sure it is this one, Jakarta library. This import the right one. Don't use the Spring Framework. So if you do that, you can see now the error is gone. Now, another thing, when you are generating IDs, you can have them as random. Maybe you can have them in order. So we are going to use another annotation called generated value, and we will need to have we need to define a strategy here, which we are going to say generation type. We can use for now, let's work with identity. So this will work best with our SQL. So there are also other auto increment. You want to move from everything else. Now, the next thing here we will want to define is maybe the name. So the name of the student. So that will be of type string, string name. Also, let's give it another property, maybe score. Sorry, I missed Kotlin. Let's say score should be of type, or let's work with grade. So let's have another string, maybe grade. So maybe you want to have scores in maybe A, B, C, score of D. So we will just work with those two. So we can have as many properties as we can. So this is all you need. But now, if you look at the old school way of doing things, so we would have done this. So we would have gone to generate. Okay, I'm just going to select all this, then come back here, just right click and say generate getters and setters, and then select we want to see getters and setters for all this, and then click OK. Now, this was the old school boilerplate code of doing things, so generating the getters and setters. So the getters and setters will ideally help you update your properties of your model or your entity. So what Lombok has done has really come to sort out of things for us. So we're just going to say at, you annotate it with at getter and at setter. So with those two annotations, you don't need any of this. Everything is now handled by these two annotations. So if you need to pass in arguments or no arguments, you can use annotations called no args constructor and at all args constructor. And imagine this is all you need to do. thanks to the power of Lombok now annotations. So of course, if you don't define your table, so your table will be automatically named a student. So you can do that by using the annotation at table, at the at table, and of course you can pass in the name of your table, the catalog scheme and everything. But for us, we won't need to define that, given it's a basic course. So this is all you need to do within your within your model class. Now, the next thing would be our repository. So repository, we're going to create an interface. So we're going to call it student repository. So this would be an interface. And for us to have all the methods or all the functions that we will need for querying the database, we're going to use, we just first make sure that we have annotated this with at repository layer, at repository annotation, and we need to extend JPA repository. So you remember the extension, not the extension. Remember the properties we added, the POM definition we added. So one of them was JPA, Spring Data JPA. So that gives us all the methods to save a record into the database, to update a record, to get a record from DB, and anything to do with CRUD ops. So here it takes into two params. So we need to define the model type. So our first parameter will be student, and the unique identifier, the primary key of this model of ours here. So the student. So we need to tell JPA that the primary key is of type long, and long, yes, this one. So if you go back to our student here, so remember our primary ID type here is long. So this is what we need to pass here inside your student repository. So you pass in your model / okay, some call it your entity, and the type of the primary key identifier. That is all you need to do on this one, on the student repository. Now, the second last part will be on the service. So this is where we write all our business logic. So later on, we will get to introduce something called service implementation, which will be an abstraction layer to our service. Now, so if we go here, so this should be a class. So we're just gonna say student service, and okay, we just created a Kotlin class. Sorry, problems of being an Android developer. So I'm going to create a new Java. I'll call it student service. Now, remember to annotate this again with service. So everywhere you go, first start with your annotations. Now, we were done with the repository layer. And for us to use this repository methods and functions, we need to auto-wire, or we need to inject a repository into this student service. And for us also to use the controller, we need to inject the service. So the service inside the controller. So the old school way of doing things was using an annotation called auto-wire, which it really had a lot of hidden complexities. So probably just the bin complexities. So what we used to do sometimes back was say private student repository and student repository, and you are done. And if you hover your mouse here, so field injection is not recommended. And if you go research more about the history of auto-wiring, you will be able to understand why constructor injection is recommended. So we're going to remove this, just cut that, and maintain that. So we will next thing after you've defined this, you're going to say public. Now we need to say we need to inject this into our constructor, the student repository. So we're going to say student repository, open opening curly brackets, say this and those student repository equal to student repository, then just close it here. So we can make it this one final. Now, this is all you need to do. So instead of using AutoWire, which is not recommended, so we are now using constructor-based injection. Now we can start writing our business logic here. So the first step, our step, so we can just call this one step one. So we're going to say step one is constructor injection. Then our step two will be defining our method. So maybe first, let's say save student to database. Now, so we're going to create a very quick public function. So our return type will be student here. Then you can say save. Let's just say save single student, or maybe save one student, or save one student. Now, what we're going to do here is, remember, we said this student repository has all the methods, unless we will need to define some which we will write them later on. So if you would want custom methods to write into a database or perform operations within your database, you will use them here. But for now, we stick to the base defined methods. So you would just come and say student repository dot save. So you can see it takes in an entity, and our entity type here is of student. So you're gonna say this will save student will take a parameter of type student and student. So we're gonna say remember our save method from the repository layer expects us to provide an entity, of which our entity is student. So we're just gonna pass their student and the statement there. Remember, we were saying we're expecting a return type of student, which if we said this student, and we have the student object here as our main entity. So we're just gonna add a return statement, and we are good for that. So step three will be maybe save multiple. So, or maybe let's go with get. So get student from DB, from the database. But for now, I want us to take this method to completion and go and test the first method. So we have database and see if everything is working as expected. So we are going to walk through, jump to the controller. So new controller is of type class. So just call it student controller. Remember again, on the controller, this is where we write all our REST APIs. So we are going to start with our notation of REST, of request mapping. And with request mapping, this is where we define our API. So we can just call it API, API slash student. You can just call it student. So API, we can just call it this one version 1. So anything here doesn't really matter. So it's just the way you want to name your APIs. Then our annotation here is a REST controller. So we need to inform Springboard that this is our REST controller, which will handle all the REST APIs, and our base URL. So this one will be our base URL, our base API URL. So then the first thing, again, remember here, step one, we always have to first do constructor injection, constructor based injection. So where we need to define that we are relying on the functions that are in student service. So that's why we need to instantiate, just like we instantiated repository layer inside the service, because we need the methods in the student repository used within the service. Now, in controller, we need these functions in our student controller. So that's why we need to first do the instantiation. So just going to do private student service, give it a name of student service. Then we instantiate this one. So we perform the injection here. So I'm just going to say public student service. then just have to see this one so that we make sure we are instantiating the right one within the same class. I'm not sure why I'm always forgetting to make it final. Now, there's something I need you to understand. So we will be using for saving, if you look at the way CRUD operation works, so saving is a post. So we are posting data inside the database. So we're going to use post mapping, and we need to define. Now we have the base URL, and for us to use save, we will need to say maybe save or add student, or so it will define. It will depend on how long you want your API to be. So for me, I'm just going to say save. Now we will write the function for saving into the database. So maybe the return type of this will be of an object, our student in our entity, which is student. So maybe save student. So we can just make it that brief. So this will, I'll take in student, student of, we can give it the name there. And remember, we are saying our return type is student. And the function responsible for saving that is within the student service, which we've injected it here. So we're just going to say return student service dot save student. And remember, our save student is expecting the entity, which we've said this is our entity, and we are giving it this name here. So we're just going to say student, and we are done. Now, one thing we need to understand is we are getting this data in form of JSON, and we need a way to for Spring Boot to receive them as objects. And for that, we have another annotation called a request body. So request body will handle automatic conversion of JSON data format into object to what the Spring Boot is expecting. So up to that point, we are officially done. So remember our first step. So maybe we can just call this one step 2. Maybe save data to database. So we are done up to that point. Now, remember our procedure. The first thing we did was to configure our database. So we just needed to say, we needed to specify the URL and the database name. So we just needed to say we are running on localhost. This is our SQL port, and our database is this one here, which we said we have them here. We have it now here. So if you have other tools to preview your database, you can. So just make sure that the username and the password for your database are correct. Remember, don't commit this to Git. So make sure that anything you commit, make sure you don't commit your .properties file. The driver, again, we need to specify that. We need to just do this again. So once you are done with this, we needed to specify what do we need to store in our database, which happens to be the entity. So remember, we just needed to say we need the entity, we needed the getter and the setter methods, and the constructors. And of importance is make sure your ID is annotated with ID from Jakarta library. And then you can specify the generation type of your ID. Anything else is optional from here. Now, the next thing we needed to do was to make sure we have the database methods by extending JPA repository. So if you go to JPA repository, you see we have so many functions. So we have delete, or we have get one, get by ID. Like we have so many methods extending the list CRUD, find all. You see we will also be using this save all, find all by ID, extending the CRUD repository, which has the save. So remember, we are using this save function, and we will also be using find by ID, find all. We will be using delete by ID. So these methods have already been defined by extending JPA repository. So I'm just going to close these ones. That is all you just need to do. If you extend this, you get every other SQL method. So remember, it takes in your entity and the primary key, the type of your primary key here. The next thing would be building the business logic. So this is where we have our service. This is where our service sits. So remember, I'm also naming our classes based on the packaging. So like repository, we will have student repository. Service, we have student service. Controller, we have student controller. It's a good naming convention. Now, onto the student service. So remember, the first thing you need to do is annotate your class. Then the next thing would be perform constructor injection, avoid using auto-wired. So, and we've decided to go with one method first to see if it works, then we come back and create other methods. So for now, we are saving a student. So we're saying we have this function called save single student. So these are our own function here, which return type is of student. And our repository is expecting the save repository, the save function is expecting that we pass in the student, which is the entity. So that is all you need to know. Now, back to the controller, you need to also specify. First things first is you define this, and then you can perform the constructor injection. Then we can now utilize our first method to save student in the DB. So remember to include request body, otherwise you will face issues because this is expecting objects. So that is what request body will be doing. So again, remember that we are injecting student repository in service because we need to use the methods in repository, and we're injecting student service in controller because we need to use these methods inside the controller. Now that's all. We just need now to run this. Then we will open our Postman and do our first can just enable this and annotation processing. Now if you run your project and scroll to the because we enabled SQL queries, so you see now that we've created a table called student, which has the name of var character minimum 255. You don't have to worry about all this for now. Just know that the database has been created successfully if you see this point and your application is running. So I'm going to open Postman. Okay, just a second. Postman is opening. So once Postman has opened, so I'm going to query the database. So just cancel this. So our first method here was API version 1, student, and then we have save. So if you go to your Postman, so you're going to create a new request. So we can create a new collection, but given that I have a new collection, we'll just directly use whatever I have. Let's do it anyway. So let's create another collection. So now inside the YouTube collection, I can add a request here. So if I click on add a request, automatically I get a get request. And given my request was post, I am going to change this to post. And for my URL, I'm just going to select just this one. So because I'm running on localhost and my port is 8080, so how do you get your port? You just come back, scroll here, and see the port that is running on your Tomcat, your server for now. Tomcat becomes your server for now. It's port 8080. So the only thing you are changing, if it's not on default, is just changing this port to 8080. So everything else remains http://localhost 8080. So I'm going to remove this. So this is where you should start. And then you now come back and collect your base URL, which is API v1 student. So API/v1/student/save. So, and then I'm going to go to the body and then select row and then make sure it's on JSON. So I'm going to open my curl brackets too. So then I'm going to go back to my entity. So I need to post the name and the grade. So ID will be automatically generated for that. So I'm going to just select the name and the grade. So I'm going to go back to my Postman. So say name. So this is the structure. You should always follow this. Name, and we were talking about grade. So because they are strings, so these are the keys which must match these ones here. So I'm going to come back here and say my name. So maybe let's say Teams, and my grade is maybe grade B. So I'm going to send this. So we have for 5 method not allowed. So let's go back and so API v1 student slash save. Let's see where the problem is. It's saying request method get is not supported. This is the problem. We are using a post, and what we've selected here is a get. So we need to change this to post. Then save it. So I'm just going to save that, and then I'm going to send. You can see now that we have our database. We are getting a response of 200. Okay, so that means our data has been saved. Now let's go back to our IDE and write a function to get student by ID. So everything starts back at the business logic, that's the service. So the good thing is once you configure your repository and your model, you don't need to go back and change anything unless you are adding additional stuff. So for now, you can say we want to create a method that we will be able to get that student. So we're going to say public. We are expecting a student object, our entity object. Then we get student by ID. So how do we get student by ID? So our unique identifier is ID, which was of type long. So I'm just going to say ID. Then I'm just going to say return. We have in the repository layer, we have a function to actually do that. So I'm just going to say student repository dot find by ID. Find by, you can see already I have ID. It's taking in a long of type optional that. So and then I'm going to pass in my ID. Now, if you put your cursor here, okay, so we can just end it here. So if you don't find this ID, what should happen? So I'm going to say or else throw. So we want to throw an error here. So don't worry about it. Just know that we need to throw a new runtime exemption to say student not found. You can also include in the ID of the student. That is all you need to know. Just know that this statement means in case we don't find the student with that particular ID, this is the error we should see on our logcat, so which happens to be here. Now, let's go to our controller and implement the same method. So I'm going step 3 on the controller is get fetch student. So let's just say fetch student from DB. So I'm going to, so fetch uses get mapping. So we're just saying get mapping, and we need to define the path, the URL, our API path. So I'm gonna say maybe get /ID. So ID of the student. So again, we're going to create, we're going to expect a student of type, so just say get student. We can just say get student, so that's enough. And remember, this student takes in a long of type ID. Then we're going to say return. So inside the student service, we've created a new function called get student by ID. So that is what we need to use here in the controller. So we're gonna say student service dot get student by ID, which takes in ID. We are done up to that point. Now, if you look at here, we were using request body to map that JSON to the object. Now, inside here, we need to tell Spring Boot that this is a path that the ID here should be part of the API URL that constructed here. So we use something called path variable. So another annotation called path variable. So at that point, we are done. So if you omit this, you will get an error of the mapping. And remember, these has to match exactly here. So if you change this to Teams, here has to be Teams. Now, we could have ideally done this, just pass in the ID. So it will be API v1 student / the ID. But for me, I want to make it unique. I want just to add another one and then another /. So I'm gonna run our application again. And then we go back to, you see everything is running. We go back to our Postman. We add another request. So just go to YouTube collection, add another request. So this will be a get request. So I just say just going to tab here. Sorry, just going to select any. So localhost port 80 v1 student/save. But for now, I want to use get slash. We have our user already, which we had said ID. So for this one, we don't need to pass anything on the body. Everything will just remain the same. We just need to see what is happening. So we don't need this. Let me just delete this so that it doesn't look like we add anything there. So if we fire this, we should be able to get some response from, okay, not post, get, then save. So if you send this, should be able to see, you now see we have this user, the query is okay. So that is basically what you need to do repeatedly for all other methods. So we have had save, we have had get, so we can save multiple and we can get multiple. So if you go back to our service, I'm just going to add another function here. So we are saving a single student, we can save a list of students. So I'm just going to say public list of students, which may save students. I'm just going to import that, import class, Java util, save students. So this one will take a list of student objects. So I'm just going to call it students. And then we need now to call this the method called student repository. Student repository dot save all. So remember, all is taking in an iterable anything that can be specified, the entity, iterable, list, flags, or anything. So we'll later on understand reactive Spring Boot. But for now, we just need to say we need to save multiple students. So we need to use camel case. Then this one needs to be, we are returning a list of saving all the students. So this is the method we need to save all the students inside the database. Now, if you need to get all the students in the database, so we're going to say public. So we're getting a list of students. So list of student. So maybe get all students. So get all students takes no parameter here. So we just need to say return student repository dot find all. So you see, find all does not require anything to be passed. So that is actually done. So we've added a method to save multiple students and a method to get multiple students. So we can also add a method to delete students. So we can have public. For deleting a student, we need to delete the student based on the ID. So maybe we can return a void, but for now I want us to return as a string statement so that we know the student has been deleted successfully. So we come and say public string delete. We can say single student or just delete student, which will take in of type ID, and then we're going to say student repository, and then delete by ID, this one, and then we pass in the ID we want to delete. So we need to return this. Okay, so we first need to say we have deleted that, and then we can say now return student deleted successfully. We can also include in the ID of the student ID, sorry, then hint the statement there. So if we need to delete all students, we need to clear the database or delete the entire database, we can just say here public. We can also still return a string, delete all students, takes in nothing. So we're going to say return, we are returning a string, say all students deleted. Then we need to say student repository dot delete all. So you can see delete all doesn't take any parameter. So make sure you also end your statement there. So I've chosen to have update as the last one because it's a little bit longer. So I'm going to put update here after you can just have it here. So I'm going to say public student update student. Now, update student will take in the student, because we want to check first if that student exists, then we update. So we will need to take the student, that is the model or the entity, and the ID. So that's why we have a student, and then our identifier as the ID. Now, this is where things get interesting. So we would have chosen another bus, but I think maps are the most simplest way of mapping this. So we're going to say here, student return student repository dot find by ID. So we first need to find this student. So we are trying to find this student by the ID passed here. That is the ID. Then we're going to say we want to map. So this map takes in a lambda. So we can say student, then opening this one. Okay, that looks weird. Student, so we're going to say student dot set. So we want to set our grade to this student here. This our new student that we want to save now. So I'm going to say student. So let's call this one yeah, we can just leave that student. So I wanted to rename it something else, but that's okay. So we can just say, remember, this is our new student, and this is the student we want to update. So we want to say student dot set grade student dot get, sorry, not set dot get grade. Just remove that. Then we're going to say student dot set name to student dot get the name here. Then we inside here, we're gonna say dot or else throw. We want to throw an error, which say we can just throw a new runtime error, runtime exception. Say no student with ID plus, let's just include the ID here. With that ID is there in the database. So we need to return now the student repository to save that student. So I'm gonna say save the student and close it here. Now we have a problem here. Student, so we can just say I can call this one updated student. Updated student. Cool. So I think we are now done with the service layer. So we're now going to call these functions within the repository, the controller. So we will now go to the controller. So we add a method to save a single student and save all. Just going to say save all is a post mapping. Public. So we are saving a list of students. List of student. Then save all students. Which is taking in a list of students. So open here and say we need to return student service dot save all save students here, and then we pass in our list of students. Did I really give it a name here? Students. So students, and we are done. Now the other function was to get all. So I'm just going to say public. So get all is a list. We are getting a list of students. So public student, a list of student. Then this one was save all. So we are getting now. So get all students. And then we're going to have a return of student service dot get all students. So we add this function here. So if you go to student service, we add the function to get all. Where is it? Get student by ID, get all students. That's what's being used here. So remember, this is just a function within this one. It's not the same thing here. So maybe we can just call it get student so that we don't confuse each other. So this is a specific method within the controller and not as referring to the other one. So end it here. So remember, it takes in a list. It's a list of student, and we can call them students. So we can let's see, which was it expecting anything? No, no, it's not expecting anything, sorry. So we don't need this, yeah. And remember, this is a get request target mapping, and we need to say /all. So we need, then I think we forgot to input in the path here. So this one is and just call it save all. This one is can say get /all, then this one can say save /all. So you need to also include that. The other method again we add, which hasn't been used here, is delete all and update. So we come back to our controller. So remember, anything that takes in a parameter, you must specify. So request body, yeah, you must specify that. So in our last 3 APIs, so we need to, one for delete, so public string. So I'm just, okay, sorry about that, cancel. So I'm just going to copy this, remove override, and say we are using a delete mapping. So delete mapping, where we want to delete student by ID. So delete. So you remember we need to add that. So I'm going to add a / and we need to specify that we want to delete by ID. And we are passing in ID here. So remember, anything to do with paths that has ID, we need to use the path variable. So you can just say here delete and delete student. Then, so I'm just gonna remove this. We'll copy this one and put it here. Now, so delete, so we can just call this one delete all students. So it's a delete mapping, and we don't need an ID while deleting all. So we can just say delete /all. Sorry, this one doesn't take in anything. So we're going to say return student service dot delete all students. Same thing here. I'm gonna say return student service dot delete student, which takes in ID. Then end use statement there. So on to our last one. So I like putting them in order, where you save, you update, you get, and you delete. So after get, we can update. So we can just put that function here. So public, we need to get a student. We need to get a student back as our return type. So public student. So update student. Let's just call it student data. Okay. So remember, our updating, we need to first pass in the entity and the ID. So we're gonna say student of type student and long type ID. So this one is a unique one. So we're using put mapping if we need to update. So we're gonna say maybe update, and we are updating a particular student, so with that ID. So here we need to specify, given we have the entity, we need to say we have a request body, and again we have a path variable to be defined here. So we're gonna go, we're gonna call return student service dot update. So remember, update takes in the entity and the identifier. So update student and particular ID that needs to be updated. And we are done with all the methods. So let's just go back to our student service just to make sure that we've utilized all the methods that are needed. So we can now run this and go to Postman and test all the methods. So just run to make sure everything is running as expected. Now we can go now to Postman. Just go to Postman and we can say post. So we can add multiple, and for us to add multiple, so just allow me to zoom this. So for us to add multiple, I'm just going to copy this. And so remember our URL for adding multiple on the controller, we need to see save all. So save all is /save/all. So we need to go back here, let's say save all. Now we need to add the square brackets. So we're gonna say we've added that. Then we need to add a comma and paste that here. Now if I run this, we can have Owen with grade C. We can have Timothy with grade H. I'm not sure if we have a grade H, and we can ascend now. It's saying method not allowed. This one is a post request. Our API. So let's see what happened within our Spring Boot. So if you go to build, it's saying okay. So it's this is the problem. We need to make this one small. So if we now run, you can see we've added 2 entries at a go, and you can see the emerging Hibernate queries. Now let's say we want to get all. So we go back to our Postman and go to, can just use this get one here. So get /all. So if we call that, you can see we now have all these three of them. So remember, we saved one, we got one, we saved multiple, we fetched multiple. We can now try to update. So for us to update, remember our update URL is update / the ID of that person we want to update. That will be our student. So if we go here and change it to put, and then we're gonna say update. Let's update Teams Owen. Let's update the grade for Teams Owen. So I'm just going to copy this one and go to the body, and to make sure I've selected JSON, paste it here and say Owen scored an A+. So I'm just going to remove that, and then I'm going to send. So you see now this was a success. So if we need to check if it was a success, we can go and go back to our get and say get all. So if you now get all, you see Owen with ID 2 has been updated to an A+. Now we can delete. So we can change this to delete. And remember, our delete, we add delete by ID. So we need to say delete and specify the ID. So let's say we want to delete Owen again. So given it's here, so I'm just going to say delete. Delete /ID number 2. Post this guy. So you see student deleted with ID 2. So if we go back and say we need to get all, just say get all query. So you see we now don't have Teams Owen with 2. So the other thing was the remaining thing was to delete all. So if we go back to our DB, our Postman client, go back to delete all and send. So you can see all is deleted. So if we decide to get everything, so get /all send, you can see we now have an empty array object. Yeah, so that is basically an intro of Spring Boot. So remember again, so first process is to get your properties right. The next one is to define your models. Remember the annotations. And remember the service class is the one that handles all the logics. And before you handle all the logics, we need to perform constructor-based injection of the repository to allow us to have these methods, that is save all, save, to be utilized within this. Then on the controller, which is final, is also to make sure that you've injected the service class methods. to be used within the controller, and you've specified whether it's a post, it's a get, it's a delete, it's update. So remember again, we have to pass in the request body just to make sure that JSON can pass through and receive objects. And then for anything to do with IDs, should have a path assignment. And remember, the ID must match this. Yes, so that is it. In the next session, we will be introducing in a service implementation, which will help us perform the abstractions. And then also we will be introducing in a reactive Spring Boot. So it will help us a lot. So it's a small advance, not really advanced, but a smaller improvement of what is happening here. So make sure you subscribe, and see you in the next episode of the Spring Boot series.